Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. My name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the service at medcommsnetworking.com for people who work in and around the global medcoms business, by which I mean people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, and medical publishing. And today we're having a fascinating meeting with people about basically succeeding in medcoms despite what life throws at us. And we've got some individuals talking about their challenges and some professionals talking. So if you're watching this video later on and you're watching just part of this, do go and have a look at the other videos that will be linked, because the whole story together is absolutely fascinating. On that note, Stephen, I'm going to hand over to you to take the lead on this session.
Thank you, Peter. Well, it's catching myself chairing this. If chairing is the right word, but it's really good that you could all join us. Jacques, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We may have to change the format a little bit as Christina's dealing with an emergency patient at the present time, but we have some questions for you, and also we have got some written responses to questions that we posed to an independent HR consultant. But the first question for myself, Jack, is could you sort of introduce yourself, because you have some quite interesting roles, really. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you'd be so kind.
Right, so I'm an occupational physician. So that's a medical doctor who's trained in occupational medicine. Before that, I was a GP and then specialized afterwards. All through my career, though, I've been interested in law and ethics as well. So I've taken degrees in that. So my interest now is especially in occupational health ethics. But I do have wide experience, both in the NHS and in the private sector. But I've been retired for years now. So, but I think my experience is reasonably current. Hopefully I can help with most questions that you'll have for me.
Jacques, you're being a little bit modest, because I believe you have an academic post in Manchester, and you've also written a book, which I'd like you to tell us about.
Thank you. Yeah, I've written a book on occupational health ethics. So it's simply entitled Occupational Health Ethics from Theory to Practice. So the main audience for that book is occupational health practitioners themselves. The majority are occupational health nurses. I mean, there's only 400 specialist occupational physicians in the UK. The majority of the work is carried out by occupational health nurses and the team around them. So that will be physiotherapists, counselors, ergonomists, and so on. So we work as a team. So it's addressed to their practical problems, really, but with a theoretical basis in ethics. But it might interest others. I've tried to make it very readable. So I think any one of you who, with the problems that you presented today, could read a few pages of this book and see what the take on occupational medicine might be. Yeah, so briefly, that's me. Did you want me to also explain what, because one of the assumptions I make in the book is that people will know what occupational health or occupational medicine is. And that isn't always, obviously, to this audience, that might not be correct. So occupational medicine is that branch of medicine that deals with the effects of health on work and work on health. So traditionally, it arose from industrial medicine. So we were used to, the foundries and chemical, toxic chemicals and so on. So the effect of those agents on the health of workers, as well as the status of your health, meeting some standards. For example, train drivers or police officers and so on, they need to meet some medical standards, and that is part of the assessment that we would make as well. So these are the two components of occupational health, really.
And Jacques, sort of, you say how the origins of this profession, what kind of range of people would an occupational physician now see in his practice?
Well, the coverage of occupational health in the UK is still a minority, really. It's not all employers offer occupational health, which is very different to Europe, for example. In many countries in Europe, there's virtually 100% coverage. But the need for occupational health might be the most obvious where there are occupational hazards, like in manufacturing. And nowadays, well, not nowadays, but for many years now, there's been a requirement for NHS personnel to have at least consultant occupational health supervision, really. So the doctors might just work a few sessions a week. That was what I did towards the end of my career, really. I might work 2 or 3 sessions, 2 or 3 half days in one trust. But look at giving advice to the occupational health nurses who would be there permanently, really, or full time. So there's occupational hazards in the NHS, but really, when you think about any sort of industry, there are hazards, and the most recognized one probably nowadays is stress and work-related stress, and that does, so from my early days of training, where sort of mental health disorders weren't considered the large part of the curriculum, to nowadays probably 60 to 70% of all referrals to occupational health services would be mental health based. So,
and on that note, sort of stress and mental health issues, obviously incredibly common. We're all stressed, I'm sure, and mental health issues, if it affects 1 in 3 of us, 1 in 4 of us, what can you actually offer?
Well, most occupational health departments will have counselors, and sometimes some will have psychologists as well. So there's the immediate support for the person that might be sometimes faster than someone could access, a patient or a worker could access via their GP, for example. But the component of stress that we particularly look at are the issues of stress at work, really. And there, because of our proximity to managers, the workplace culture, we have a chance of hopefully getting to the root cause of the stress if it's arising from work. One of the approaches is a stress risk assessment. And when I first started, probably about 20 years ago, people said, well, on the issue of stress risk assessments, when I mentioned this to managers and so on, and they said, well, I mean, the first 20 years ago, 25 years ago, managers didn't want to talk about stress. They said that, well, either they said it didn't exist, or they said, well, if we start mentioning stress, everyone's going to say they're stressed, and we won't have anyone working, really. And in those early days, and that was in a chemical manufacturing company, and actually they were persuaded to start the process. And it was quite the opposite, because people became very open about what were potential stresses. Then they started looking for solutions, and people weren't off. Prior to that, if people weren't coping, they would be presented with back pain or other sort of physical illnesses that, but always hiding the real root cause. But by bringing it to the open, issues could be addressed.
Jack, I mean, who are you paid by? Which leads me to the question, do you represent the client who comes to see you, or do you represent the employer? Because my impression is, occupational health, attention to occupational health, it's a first step on the road to, that leads to the out the door, really.
Yeah, very good question. I mean, we are paid by the employer in the main. Even when, NHS-based occupational health services might be thought of being more independent, but at the end of the day, they're still paid by the employer. But our role is meant to be completely unbiased, neither siding with the patient or the employer. But it's a very difficult balance to achieve, really. And I think depending on who you see, you might see some occupational health physicians who are slightly more on the employer or manager's side. And I'll be quite open about it, that I've tended to be more on the patient side. And I make no apologies for this, really, because of the panelists this morning, in the first session, what struck me very much was how well supported they are by these employers. But I have also seen employers who are not supportive at all. And when you have workers at the most vulnerable, I think our role as an occupational health professional is to be, to at least give them a chance to present their case and that sort of thing, really, to be I'd still say impartial, but at least our role, I think, is to ensure some degree of fairness in what goes on between the work and the employer. Because when someone's going through the difficult times that all the panelists have described this morning, when you're in the thick of it and your mind isn't very clear, and if your employer is very, very negative about you, you might accept anything they say, you might believe anything they say, and so on. And I think in those circumstances, we have to say, well, firstly, that might be the wrong time to be making a decision. You're not fully, you need to give your treatment time, to see the right specialist for a start, to get the right help, be on the right treatment, give that a chance to work, and let's look at what could be adjusted, what potentially could be adjusted in the workplace, because we only give advice, and it is up to the manager to accept or decline, really, any sort of adjustments that we propose. But yeah, I mean, so I'd say it could be both. I would hope that the majority would at least, we're not part of a process of trying to get workers the sack, and very often we wouldn't know the outcome. So we would give the advice as impartial as we can on the condition, what could be done, and so on, and give that advice to the manager. But that might be the last we hear of it. So yeah. Another point that I would raise to, for those that I think in the UK, the way that occupational health is provided now is by large occupational health providers. And there's some distancing between the occupational health service and the workforce, because they're not employed primarily by that employer. They have their own. So although that gives a little bit of distance between the employer and the professional, the difficulty is that the employer controls this relationship via the contracts. So if they're not happy with what they're hearing, they could easily not renew the contracts. And but I think as professionals have to rise above this and still do the job as we think it should be done. If we lose the contract, we lose the contract, and that's it. Because although I've said it's work on health and health at work, one of our key drivers is to protect the health of workers at work. That is the sort of, when there's conflict, when there are difficulties between employer and employee, that's always what I use as the sort of, gives me a sense of direction. You know, are we protecting the health of a worker here in this situation? And this is the sort of direction that I've taken the books on ethics and so on in. And that's how, as you mentioned, I still teach. I teach at Manchester University, and that's how I, teach the students to carry on. That's.
I think, Jacques, in preparing for this session, I may have got the line wrong, but I think you said of one enlightened employer that you were the last bastion of fairness or something in the company, or words to that effect. Did I get that right? The quote, I thought that was another quote.
Yeah, that was many years ago, and I was, that was when I was still a very young doctor, and I was very struck by one of the, manufacturing companies that I was working for, the managing directors, because, the role also included giving advice directly to higher management on policy and so on. We'd be part of health and safety meetings. So the managing director would see me in those sorts of contexts, really. And there would be advice or policy advice that I would give based on health, really. I would say, well, I think, we're putting workers' health at risk if we use X, Y, and Z. But for financial reasons, they might push for whichever processes to be used, really, they were either cheap or whatever. But even though we disagreed on those points, he would say, yes, Jacques, but you're the conscience of this organization, of this company. So even though we might disagree, I still want to hear what it is that, we should be doing. He might decide not to do it, but at least he's got someone telling him that. And I think we are going a little bit full circle. I'm seeing more companies now wanting to get that sort of advice of what is how they can act to help the well-being of their workforce. I think that's starting to come about.
Yeah.
For 40 years or so, I've seen so many workers say the opposite of what many of you have said this morning, because I was picking up on one or two saying how valued you felt, how you'd been treated by the organization and that made you feel valued. I would, to my sorrow, really, I've heard so many nurses, for example, say how they feel just like, pegs that you can just put just anywhere. A nurse might be trained in a certain field, and because of shortage of staff, they're told by the manager, no, you're on ward, whatever, and in a specialty that they have no idea. So devalued, not all their training or their experience. So for many, many years, this is the sort of aspect of my work that I felt very sad at having to deal with people in those situations, really. But I'm starting to see that organizations have realized that if they treat their staff better, it's everyone wins, really.
So Jacques, just keeping a little eye on the time. Two last things from me. This morning we've heard from, or this afternoon we've heard from Lisa about horrendous COVID problems. Katia, obviously, about issues with the menopause. We've heard about migraines. David managing his diabetes, autism. Is there anything you as a professional could have offered these people had they come to you?
I would probably, in a word, I'd probably say no. because I think one of the aims that we should have is to make ourselves redundant as occupational health professionals. But that happens, you know, in the experience that I've had with the employers that I've encountered in the main, that hasn't happened. We've had to be the voice, you know, suggesting the adjustments, suggesting the flexibility. But, you know, we can only give this, but with employers who do value their employees, who do make the effort, who have those conversations, where there's mutual trust, I think, between, you know, employer and employee workers. No, very often we might add just a very little, but in my recollection of, you know, probably working 35 to 40 years in the field, there was once when a manager referred me someone, it had been with a mental health problem, and he said, well, this is what we've done, and this is, you know, the adjustments and the gradual return to work, as Lisa Marie had, you know, gradual phase return and so on. This is what we've agreed, and this is what we've been doing. And all I had, there was nothing I could add. And I said, you know, this is the best referral I've ever had, because I've not had to do anything at all. I've said to the manager, this, you know, you've done absolutely everything that I could have suggested. And in many of your cases, this is what I would say probably would be the result, really. I might, you know, depending on, we'd have to spend a little bit more time with each one of you, because there might be circumstances, you know, for example, with type 1 diabetes, if there are certain risk situations, like I've had nurses or lab workers in the NHS and so on, very often their problem really has been managers being worried about them being not being able to do certain duties and so on. So what I would highlight there is the need to do an individual assessment. You know, so we might look at labels, diagnoses, and so on. But I think several of you have already mentioned that there's a wide range of symptoms, a wide range of severities. And what we need to look at is the individual. How does that condition affect you really as a person? And everyone will have very different needs and different needs in the workplace. And for the nurses, sometimes the managers would, well, sometimes I would get, you know, can she really, you know, can this nurse really work here in a busy A&E department, whatever, and then that sort of thing, try to not to employ them or get them in their department. But in the main, they've been very, very successful, and all they've needed is sometimes quick access to some snacks in the you know, in their fridge, or ability to take their blood sugars when they need to, and that sort of thing. And as David is mentioning, I think, you know, there's no reason for most diabetics for them not to be able to do the full job. Sometimes you just have to think of a few minor adjustments, but yeah. But I think I don't have anything very specific. Yeah, like in Daniel's case, you know, with the migraine and so on, this is what we would be trying to negotiate with the employer, that they have some flexibility when they do have the problem where, you know, can they rest, can they go in a dark place or whatever, then that individual needs really. Could there be some flexibility in the way people work? You know, I think one of the advantages, I think it was Mark, wasn't it, that mentioned the advantage of having COVID and working from home, is that's one of the aspects of, you know, why can't people work from home when they have a particularly bad day? In many jobs, that has been possible even before. But I think COVID has shown us that this does work. I think prior managers were worried that if people aren't in the workplace, they're not going to work. But I think COVID has taught us that that's not true.
Thank you very much for that. I think Christina was trying to just log in there, but not a problem. The final one here, question here from Michael. Also, I wondered about this. So we're a small company. If one wants to find an occupational physician, how does one do that? I mean, probably a big company like Ashfield may well have an occupational physician. How does one find one if one's a freelancer or an individual on their own?
I would suggest you check on the Society of Occupational Medicine website, SOM website. They will list occupational providers who are, who they endorsed, really.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for that. Peter, could you just check see if Christina's just trying to, I think she was trying to join us. I don't know if you can see her there. Okay, not a problem.
It's not there now.
Okay. Katya, anything from you, or do you want to now maybe mention about the HR advice?
I will do. Just wanted to make one comment, actually, from Jack's absolutely fascinating occupational, that it's interesting that it was born out of industries which were high risk, construction, where you could fall and kill yourself. And we're all, MedComms is a desk-based job, safe for all intents and purposes, but that actually doesn't reduce all the challenges that people have, and that some simple adjustments that can help them. But I thought that was fascinating, is that, we're not in, we don't tame lions or something like that, but that doesn't mean that people don't have challenges.
Yes, and I think in recent years, I mentioned stress and mental health. So the fact that, it's spoken, that we speak more openly about health conditions now. And I think you've brought the menopause. I think that's another large area of interest now, that so your health problems are now highlighted more in a way, because the risks directly from the workplace, from toxins and all the dangers have diminished, or made them much safer and more controlled. So yeah, there are fewer workers, and the employer should, we hope they would value their workers more.
Absolutely. Jack, that was very insightful. I never knew what occupational physicians did, so that's been very, very helpful. And also, as Lisa Marie said, honest of you to say where you can't help. So that is useful, really. Katya, can I pass the baton to you? Because I think you're going to mention a couple of HR things, and it might just be that Jack is able to comment on a couple of them. I'm conscious about the time. Perhaps a couple of minutes just on
it was really, I think it fits in quite nicely in terms of, if we're looking at everybody doing well in the workplace, and we talked about the challenges, you actually need the right environment to do well. And so that sort of touches on topics like equality, diversity, and inclusion, not as buzzwords, but actually as descriptions of good working environments. And we have a friendly human resources consultant that couldn't be with us, Yvette Court, but I asked her about these terms. So it's very easy to use them without understanding what they mean. And she provided me with some descriptions that I thought I'd share with you. She also provided some very interesting resources that I thought, I don't know if we can share them at some point, would be very good. So her description about equality in terms of equal job opportunities and fairness for all employees and applicants, and the idea that somebody mustn't be treated unfairly because of a particular characteristic, whether that's their age or religion or ethnicity. And really linked to that is the concept of diversity. So workplace is actually encouraging a wide range of people with different backgrounds, with these different aspects, rather than a very narrow group of people that all think the same, and really valuing those differences, but being set up to monitor whether you are being diverse. So she makes the point that it's not just recognizing the benefits of people with diverse backgrounds, but actually monitoring it and taking action if that's not happening. And then the third term, inclusion, she described as really a place where everybody feels valued and they feel safe to either raise issues or make suggestions or look at different ways of working. And really, I thought that was quite interesting, because when you take all three together, the equality, diversity and inclusion, I think quite often we use it when we're almost thinking about the negatives, you know, avoiding harassment, avoiding bullying, avoiding discrimination. But she actually had a much more positive view of it. And she really described it in terms of actually creating an environment where you attract and keep staff, you make them happy and motivated, you improve ideas and really generating problem solving. But also as a business, you are able to deliver work to maybe a more diverse audience, a bigger range of customers, and actually that's successful for the company. So I thought that was quite a nice way, it's only very briefly, but just to get us thinking about those terms. One of the links, and Stephen, I don't know how we're going to do this sharing of the links, but she did provide some links towards mental health, disability and well-being. The one thing that I'm really interested in is that she provided a link to the question, how and when do I disclose a disability during job applications? And I know a lot of people often worry about that. When should they say something? And it's probably it's one of these it depends answers. So it's a little bit too much to go into today, but it's from the Open University. And I think there might be some useful tips there for people to know if they are in a situation and they're going for a new job, when do they raise some of these issues? And she's done a whole list of other things as well. So if that is something that we could share with people afterwards, and I think that would be really nice.
On that note, Rhiannon in the chat has suffered from an eating disorder, and her question is exactly that. You know, should you be telling people at the interview that you have this problem? Jack, I don't know. Do you have any comments on that, perhaps?
If we look at disability discrimination legislation, what the requirement is for disclosure after you've been offered the job, because that goes to the Occupational Health Department then, and we would keep diagnosis confidential. We don't routinely tell the employer what the diagnosis is unless that's what the employee wants. But so yes, our advice would be not to disclose before you've been offered the job.
That's really helpful, actually. That's good to know. Okay. Katja, any more on that? So what we're going to do, so Daniel's tips about migraine, it's on the St. Giles Medical website. There's a sort of a kind of a posting site on there, sub-site called Medium, and you can see his 2 articles there. The advice from Yvette Court, we're also going to post later on this afternoon. It's almost ready to go. We'll also post that on Medium. So there are lots of useful resources on that. She's very, very human, and she's looked after us very, very well, really. A couple of things from the website. Yes, so comment from Mark. I thought this was incredibly sad. 2 care workers, 1 minute looking after people with dementia, 1 minute they're praised and the best things at sliced bread. The next minute it's a bit like they're clapping for the NHS. The next minute they're being criticised. That's just a sad reflection. We still have this business, Lisa Marie, that we're going to hopefully touch on about difference between COVID and other chronic diseases. We could possibly mention that. And also practical advice about menopause. You're going to pick that up, Katja, I think, individually. Lisa Marie, do you want to say anything quickly about the difference between COVID and other chronic diseases? Or
quickly, the only thing with COVID and post-COVID, it's still so new. Like every chronic disease as well is different to every single person. The only thing I will say is different is, whereas it's very similar, some of my personal experience, it's very similar to ME. However, alongside it as well with really bad lungs, my heart rate going mental. It's just trying to find the box, the correct box that I fit in of how to find the right help. It's a really hard question, and one I genuinely have been sat thinking about for about an hour, and I still can't think of the right answer to it, because I don't think there is one. It's just all very new. There's so many different ailments within it. I think it's like 55, one thing about like 55 long-term effects have been with long COVID. 55 are the main issues or ailments that people have found, 55, and that's after 12 weeks of having COVID. And it's just still so new to be able to answer that question, but I assure you tomorrow I'm going to think about that really hard, and I will come back to you, because I don't know the answer right now, in all honesty.
Thank you so much for that. Katja, I think we're done. We need to hand back.
Yes.
Are there any final comments or anything quick that anyone else wants to say? A great session, Jack, really.
Brilliant.
I just want to say thank you for listening, and thank you for the opportunity to put my story across.
Inspiring.
Fantastic. Peter, it's back to
again, shall I jump back in? I mean, again, guys, absolutely fascinating listening to you, and I hope we are inspiring people to have these conversations within their own organizations. And I think that several of you have talked about the importance of being open and talking to people, and the fact that being open isn't necessarily a negative, because you can find solutions, you can find better ways of working and so on. I think we've touched on the whole COVID thing. There's benefits in terms of flexible working. I think there's probably issues that still need to, challenges that are raised, but more flexibility, more transparency, more openness, more diversity, more sort of leads to more successful business and more successful individuals. I think that's all good stuff, but there was a ton of stuff in there, and we could have gone on for far longer in lots of different directions, and I'm well aware of that. So I hope, if nothing else, we've just started some really interesting conversation, got some people thinking. So for today, I'm going to say huge thanks to the audience for coming and joining us. We're going to have a session 3 in a minute. If you're watching the video later on, there are 3 of these sessions which are going to hang together, and the videos will be interlinked and so on. But thank you very much to you guys on the panel for this. Huge thank you. Give us all a wave, and we'll say bye for now. Thank you very much. Take care, guys.